Welcome to Anewz. I'm Dilek Tuna. Let's begin with the headlines for the hour. Trump says Russia and Ukraine agree to immediate ceasefire talks. European leaders welcomed the Pope's offer to host Russia-Ukraine talks at the Vatican. Israel lets aid into Gaza after an 11-week blockade, but the UN calls it a drop in the ocean. US President Donald Trump says he had a productive phone call with Russia's Vladimir Putin about ending the war in Ukraine. The two-hour conversation was followed by a call with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump says Russia and Ukraine will now begin negotiations toward a ceasefire, though Moscow has not committed to one yet. Our Obay Shapandar from Washington, D.C. has more.
It was a 2-hour-long call between the American and Russian presidents to discuss ways on how to end the war in Ukraine. President Trump released a statement on Monday saying that he believed that his call with Russian leader Vladimir Putin went well. The president announced that Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations towards a ceasefire as part of a process to end the war that began with an all-out Russian invasion in 2022. Trump called the Russian war with Ukraine a catastrophic bloodbath that must come to an end. He believes that a peace deal and normalization of ties would also enable large-scale trade between Moscow and Washington that would benefit the ailing Russian economy. Trump spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky after his call with Putin and pressed for immediate negotiations between Kyiv and the Kremlin. In a public statement, Vladimir Putin also sounded upbeat regarding the nature of his call with President Trump. Putin told the Russian media that his call was very informative, very open, and overall very useful. The only new development for now is that Putin told Trump that he would work on a, quote, memorandum with Ukraine on future peace talks. Putin did not agree to any ceasefire to start those talks with Ukraine. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who was also on the call with President Trump and Zelensky, said afterwards that it's important that the United States stays engaged. Republicans in the U.S. Congress have told the Trump administration that they are ready to introduce new sanctions that would hit the Russian economy hard if the Russians do not prove serious in their negotiations. Western intelligence reports that in the last month, Russian forces in Ukraine have made increased tactical gains in the eastern part of the Donbass region. The Russian military is believed to have suffered over 950,000 casualties, including approximately 250,000 Russian soldiers killed in its war with Ukraine. Ubay Shabander, Washington, D.C., Anewz.
Earlier, we discussed the recent phone call of Trump and Putin with John Kovlich, senior editor at Issue Insight. John shared his insights on why the Vatican might be a place for a negotiation and what is Trump's motivation to bring Putin and Zelensky back to the negotiating table.
What is going to come first? What is going to come second? Who's responsible for what? And then who's actually going to get everything rolling? And then the last sentence of President Trump's statement is about the Vatican, where Pope Leo had mentioned that the Vatican would be available. Now, one interesting thing about the Vatican is that, unlike many other countries, the Vatican is not a signatory to, ironically, the Rome Convention, which set up the International Criminal Court. President Putin is under indictment from the International Criminal Court, basically as an unindicted war criminal. So there are certain countries he can go to and certain ones he can't. Turkey is one that he can go to. And so he could, since the Vatican is a city-state, he could fly into the Vatican. The question would be, you'd be flying over European airspace, including Italy. So, would he want to do that? But maybe for lower level discussions, the Vatican might be a place. So, it's a good day that they had the discussion. I'm not so certain, how we actually turn the ignition to now get everything going. Who's going to go first in terms of Russia and Ukraine doing what President Trump asked them to do? It certainly doesn't express any placing of pressure points upon either President Putin nor President Zelensky. President Trump's statement is all about the positive, including if I didn't think it was positive, I would tell you all now rather than waiting to tell you all later. So he's backing away from backing away. During the last weeks, we've had Secretary Rubio, we've had Vice President Vance, we've had Keith Kellogg, the Special Envoy Ukraine, we've had Steve Witkoff, the Special Envoy to Russia and Ukraine, Iran, and Gaza, all come out and say that the president, is frustrated, and the president is prepared to walk away and let the Russians and the Ukrainians fight it out, kill each other, and whatever happens, happens. And I do think that President Trump has the ability, the intestinal ability to walk away, but he doesn't really want to because he wants to be the guy that made this war end. And if he can't make the war end, he wants to be the guy that got them both to agree to a ceasefire, because in the end, for President Trump, his interest began with the ceasefire. 30-day ceasefire, then you use that to talk about everything else leading toward a peace agreement. So for him, if he can get the ceasefire, then he can sort of wash his hands and say, I'm not walking away having unfinished business, because what I've said I would do is a ceasefire. I've done that. If they violate it, they start fighting again. That's not on Donald Trump. And Nobel Peace Prize Committee, I'm waiting for your call.
Pope Leo XIV has offered the Vatican as a venue for peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. This initiative has received support from European and US leaders. While the Vatican hasn't officially confirmed the offer to host the talks, the international community views this development as a hopeful step towards ending the conflict.
European and US leaders have expressed support for Pope Leo XIV's offer to host peace talks between Russia and Ukraine at the Vatican. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni confirmed that leaders, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, French President Emmanuel Macron, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, discussed the initiative with US President Donald Trump following his conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Pope, the first American-born pontiff, emphasized his commitment to global peace during his inaugural Mass, calling for a just and lasting peace. He later met with President Zelensky, marking his first known conversation with a foreign leader. US President Donald Trump said it would be great for Russia and Ukraine to hold ceasefire talks at the Vatican, saying it would add extra significance to the proceedings. Trump expressed confidence that both Russian and Ukrainian leaders are inclined towards resolution and noted that Putin has had enough.
Part of the Oval Office, the White House, big egos involved, but I think something's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'd just back away and they're going to have to keep going. Again, this was a European situation. It should have remained a European situation, should have remained, but we have because the past administration felt very strongly that we should be involved, and we got involved much more than Europe did in terms of the money. And my whole life is like deals, one big deal. And if I thought that President Putin did not want to get this over with, I wouldn't even be talking about it.
While the Vatican has not officially confirmed the offer to host the talks, European leaders have welcomed the initiative. Prime Minister Meloni says that the Holy Father's willingness to host the talks at the Vatican was considered positive, and Italy is ready to facilitate contacts and work for peace. The proposal represents a significant diplomatic effort involving religious and political leaders aiming to address the ongoing conflict in Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv and its partners are exploring a high-level peace summit with Russia, the US, EU nations and the UK. He suggested the meeting could take place in Turkey, the Vatican or Switzerland. During calls with US President Donald Trump, Zelensky stressed the need for a ceasefire or more sanctions on Russia and to ensure no deals are made without Ukraine's involvement.
I had 2 phone calls with President Trump today in different formats. During the first call, we talked about what is very important for Ukraine, the ceasefire. We talked about these things in Istanbul and before that. The second topic we talked about is the readiness of the United States to make more serious sanction steps. I asked him to consider it and impose the sanctions if Russia does not support the ceasefire and doesn't want to end this war.
Germany is working with allies on a new package of sanctions aimed at pressuring Russia to agree to a ceasefire in its war with Ukraine. That's according to Bloomberg. The EU is set to adopt its 17th sanctions package this week, targeting Russia's financial sector. The EU also plans to hit third-party banks, helping Moscow's war effort. Whether the US joins depends on the outcome of the call between Trump and Putin. Germany says the goal is to push Putin toward peace talks. The United Kingdom and the European Union have agreed to a landmark deal aimed at resetting their post-Brexit relationship and boosting trade and security.
Britain has agreed to the most significant reset of defence and trade ties with the European Union since Brexit. Nearly 9 years after it voted to leave the bloc, Britain, a defence heavyweight, will take part in joint procurement projects. UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a new agreement aimed at boosting trade and enhancing cooperation on security and migration, a move he says is what the British public wants.
We on this side are following through on what the British public voted for last year and the mission of this government to deliver security and renewal for our country and improve the lives of working people. In uncertain times, a new era for defence, security and trade, we will do that by strengthening our relationships with allies around the world, including, of course, with Europe. So that is what today is all about, moving on from stale old debates, looking forward, not backwards.
US President Donald Trump's tariffs, alongside warnings that Europe should do more to protect itself, forced governments around the world to rethink trade, defence and security ties. According to the British government, the reset, with its biggest trading partner, would reduce red tape for food and agriculture producers, making food cheaper, improve energy security, and add nearly $12.1 billion to the economy by 2040. The deal, finalized after 6 months of negotiations, is the third major international agreement struck by the UK government in as many weeks, following recent pacts with the United States and India.
Tensions rise as nuclear talks between Iran and the United States face a critical impasse. Tehran insists on continuing uranium enrichment for peaceful purposes, while Washington demands a complete halt.
Nuclear talks between Iran and the United States have reached a stalemate. Iranian officials warn the negotiations will lead nowhere if the US insists on a zero enrichment condition. They have also expressed frustration over what they describe as inconsistent US positions throughout the talks.
We use the word difficult in relation to negotiations with the US. Part of the difficulty is dealing with a party that does not adhere to conventional diplomatic rules. Imposing sanctions while claiming to pursue diplomacy is a clear sign of bad faith and lack of seriousness.
The United States views Iran's continued enrichment as a direct threat to regional and global security. US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff made this clear on Sunday, stating that the Trump administration's red line is that Iran cannot keep any ability to enrich uranium, not even at 1%.
Well, the president has been very clear. He wants to solve this conflict diplomatically and with dialogue. And he's given all the signals. He's directly sent letters to the Supreme Leader. I have been dispatched to deliver that message as well, and I've delivered it. But on the other hand, we have one very, very clear red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of an enrichment capability. We've delivered a proposal to the Iranians that we think addresses some of this without disrespecting them.
Meanwhile, Iran strongly rejects the US demand to completely stop uranium enrichment, asserting its right to enrich uranium under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Tehran says its nuclear energy program has entirely peaceful purposes. Iran's foreign ministry said enrichment will continue with or without a deal. However, the country is open to serious talks to avoid developing nuclear weapons. Tehran also denies receiving any written US proposals. Since mid-April, Oman has been mediating several rounds of talks aimed at easing US sanctions in exchange for restrictions on Iran's nuclear program. However, key disagreements, especially over uranium enrichment, remain unresolved. The next round of US-Iranian talks is expected to take place in Rome this weekend.
The United Nations is calling the latest humanitarian aid trucks for Gaza a drop in the ocean and urges for an urgent increase in assistance. It's allowed 9 vehicles to enter the strip after an 11-week blockade.
After 11 weeks of total blockade, Israeli authorities have allowed limited humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. The United Nations has welcomed the step, but says the amount of aid permitted is far from enough.
Remain in place. Today, he said 9 of our trucks were cleared to enter via the Karim Shalom crossing, but it is a drop in the ocean of what is urgently needed, and significantly more aid must be allowed into Gaza starting tomorrow morning. To say that this is a drop in the ocean is a clear understatement, right? Of course, 9 trucks is better than no trucks, but we need a massive uptick of humanitarian aid.
Responding to Israeli and US efforts to restructure aid mechanisms, the UN reaffirmed its position. The organization's spokesperson emphasized that until a ceasefire is reached, priorities remain for aid deliveries and the release of hostages.
We need to get the hostages out. We understand there are discussions going on with the help of the mediators, with the help of the US, the help of Qatar, the help of Egypt, to get Israel and Hamas to agree. We need that to happen. In the meantime, we will continue to do our work proudly under very, very difficult circumstances. Very dangerous circumstances. As I mentioned, 3 more of our colleagues were killed today, 2 of them on an airstrike in what had been an UNRWA school. But we do not need to bend on our principles on how we do our work.
The UN has always said that Gaza needs at least 500 trucks of aid and commercial goods every day. The World Food Programme says more than 116,000 metric tons of food, enough to feed 1 million people for up to 4 months, is standing ready to be brought in. However, it remains unclear how much aid would be allowed in and how it would be distributed. Since the Gaza aid blockade began on the 2nd of March, 57 children have reportedly died from the effects of malnutrition, according to the Ministry of Health. If the situation persists, nearly 71,000 children under the age of 5 are expected to be acutely malnourished over the next 11 months. UK, France and Canada call the current aid insufficient, urging Israel to lift restrictions. They also warn they will take further concrete actions if Tel Aviv doesn't allow assistance through. The warning comes as thousands of aid trucks wait at the Gaza border, surrounded by uncertainty of when they can be delivered.
A series of explosions have rocked Gaza early Tuesday morning, with multiple blasts visible and audible from southern Israel. Israel's military says it's conducted a wave of strikes on more than 670 Hamas targets in the Strip over the past week. It's part of the latest campaign called Operation Gideon's Chariots, with authorities saying they've killed dozens of fighters. Israeli strikes have killed more than 500 civilians in the past 8 days, with at least 40 people killed on Monday, according to local medical workers. Earlier, the Israeli military had ordered residents in Khan Yunis to evacuate ahead of what it says was going to be a major assault targeting Hamas infrastructure. Iran hosted the Tehran Dialogue Forum on the 18th and 19th of May, as 200 prominent guests from more than 50 countries took part in the event. Discussions focused on bilateral issues, regional cooperation and global developments. Our Touraj Shiraliliu has more.
Iran hosted the Tehran Dialogue Forum on 18th to 19th of May, as 200 prominent guests from more than 50 countries took part in the event as a platform to discuss bilateral issues, regional cooperation, and global developments. The fourth Tehran Dialogue Forum, which was organized by Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Monday and Tuesday, brought in prime ministers, presidential aides, foreign ministers, and former government officials to Iran's capital from 53 countries. The participants included dignitaries from Azerbaijan and Armenia, from South Caucasia, Afghanistan and Tajikistan, from Central Asia, Oman, Qatar, Iraq, and Iraqi Kurdistan from the Persian Gulf and Middle East, and the Secretary General of Shanghai Security Organization as speakers of the event. Azerbaijan's Presidential Assistant for International Affairs, Hikmet Hajiev, was one of the high-ranking guests at the two-day forum in which he addressed bilateral relations with neighboring Iran as well as regional issues. He supported increased bilateral ties between Baku and Tehran, especially in trade and commerce, and suggested enhanced multilateral cooperation. Hajiev met Mehdi Sanai, Iran's presidential aide, and Ali Akbar Ahmadian, Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, on the sidelines of the forum. Iran used the opportunity of hosting this year's forum not only as a dialogue platform to discuss regional and global issues, but also to hold meetings with guests who visited Tehran. In addition to the plenary panels, Q&As, and bilateral meetings, foreign ministers of Iran, Oman, and Qatar held a trilateral meeting to negotiate major issues of interest. In recent months, Iran has hit the international news headlines with its ongoing indirect nuclear talks with the United States over its nuclear program. However, today and yesterday, Iran showcased its diplomatic power by sending the message that it is able to organize a forum on key regional and world issues while at the bargaining table with the US to lift its unilateral sanctions on Iran. Touraj Shiraliliu, reporting for Anewz TV, Tehran.
Armenian Parliament Speaker Alan Simonyan says peace talks with Azerbaijan are progressing and could involve meetings between head of states. He added that the timing and location of the agreement are yet to be determined, with international partners actively supporting the process. However, Azerbaijan maintains that two preconditions should be met to ensure lasting peace: the removal of territorial claims against Azerbaijan's Karabakh region from the Armenian constitution and the dissolution of the OSCE Minsk group. The defence ministers of Azerbaijan and Israel have met in Tel Aviv to discuss expanding military cooperation. Israeli Defence Minister Israel Katz called the partnership with Azerbaijan a strong strategic alliance based on trust and shared interests. Additionally, Katz thanked Azerbaijan for its support after the October 7th Hamas attack and for helping mediate between Israel and Turkey. He also noted Azerbaijan giving Israel 12 points at Eurovision, calling it a sign of true friendship. Turkey is preparing to launch a super high-speed train line between its capital Ankara and its largest city, Istanbul. The new line will slash travel time between the two cities to just 80 minutes. The project is part of a broader nationwide rail expansion and modernisation effort.
At a speed of 350 kilometers an hour, traveling by train in Turkey between Ankara and Istanbul is set to take 80 minutes in the future. A new super high-speed rail project has been announced by Turkey's Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, Abdulkadir Uraloğlu. He made the announcement at the National Turkish Student Union National Technology Academy program in Istanbul. The minister also detailed several large-scale railway initiatives underway across the country. He said that Turkey's rail network currently spans 13,900 kilometers and will grow to approximately 28,500 kilometers once all ongoing projects are completed. Among the major projects is the Northern Railway project, which is set to cross the Yavuz Sultan Selim Bridge. Uraloğlu explained that the ministry plans to conduct a tender for this project within the year. The line will connect northern Istanbul with a new high-speed railway running from Sabiha Gökçen Airport to Istanbul Airport and onward to Çatalca. Turning to urban transit, the minister underscored the scale of investment in Istanbul's transportation infrastructure. He said around 162 kilometers of new rail systems have been added to the city so far, with another 26 kilometers currently under construction. Once completed, Istanbul's total rail system length is expected to reach between 380 and 400 kilometers. Looking back at the broader transformation in Turkey's transport sector over the past 23 years, Uraloğlu highlighted that the length of divided highways has increased from 6,100 kilometers to 29,700 kilometers, including motorways. The new initiatives he suggested are key steps toward enhancing connectivity, supporting economic growth, and easing daily commutes for millions across the country.
The Kazakhstani national atomic company Kazatomprom is looking to expand its uranium exports to Europe. The company has held talks with Romania's state-owned SN Nuclear Electric, aiming to strengthen energy ties between the two countries. Our correspondent in Almaty, Fariza Kalimurzina, has the story.
Talks between Kazakhstan's national atomic company Kazatomprom, Romania's Minister of Energy, and the country's nuclear energy producer SN Nuclear Electric are focused on two key areas: increasing uranium supply and potential collaboration in the beryllium industry. At the core of the discussion was a proposed 10-year contract that would secure a steady supply of Kazakhstan uranium to Romania. The fuel would support both existing reactors and future nuclear energy developments. However, specific figures and volumes of this contract have not been disclosed. Kazatomprom believes that a long-term supply deal would help cement strategic ties with Romania and ensure a reliable source of nuclear fuel, critical as Romania looks to expand its energy independence and reduce reliance on external sources. In addition to uranium, both countries are also eyeing cooperation in the beryllium sector. This rare metal is a key material in high-precision industries, particularly nuclear and aerospace. Romanian representatives voiced strong interest in scientific and technical collaboration with the Ulba metallurgical plant in Uskümen, a major Kazakh producer of beryllium products. They also discussed the possibility of processing beryllium from Romanian deposits, potentially creating a new pipeline for European-sourced raw materials to be developed with Kazakh expertise. According to the Secretary of State at Romania's Ministry of Energy, securing uranium supply from Kazakhstan is not just a commercial agreement, it's a strategic move. He said that the deal would provide Romania with energy security and help diversify fuel sources amid ongoing geopolitical uncertainty and global market pressures. Uranium is one of the main natural resources of Kazakhstan. The country ranks first in the world in terms of its production and second in terms of reserves. Kazatomprom's latest annual report shows that the company produced 12.3 thousand tons of uranium in 2024. The largest buyers remain China, Russia, the United States, and France. Fariza Kalimurzina, Anewz, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
That's the world news for the hour. Keep watching Anewz for more updates.